Madam, who's been conducting the program, uh, at the beginning, she used, I think, on 3 or 4 occasions, she used a very loaded word. She said, "We have been loaded with information." So I'm going to be, because for a valedictory session, this is a very respectable crowd. Otherwise, you are usually only talking to the chairs. And 2 days of such a solid seminar. Um it's very difficult for a non-specialist, for a non-expert like me. I don't know why Professor Amit Dholakia insists on inviting non-specialists like us. But he's perhaps just expressing his friendship, and so he's invited me. On a previous occasion, I couldn't make it, and I felt extremely bad. So, despite a very hectic schedule and running a fever and a very bad throat, because you'll forgive me, at times it may become Ushranam Lagna Velayam Gardhabha Stuti Pathaka. So probably if you don't understand what I'm saying or what I'm intending to say, you can forgive me because of my health condition. But nevertheless, I think it's a very fascinating 2 days from what I gather from the report and from all these thinkers that you have discussed. I think it's fascinating and inspiring. And that you could bring out a booklet on the NEP, and my young friend Shubham is one of the editors. I think, as I told you, no other university has done such a thing. And therefore, we need to applaud your effort, and hats off to you, a great big salute to all your effort. So I would really like to thank Honorable Vice Chancellor of MS University, Professor Dhanesh Patelji. I would like to thank Professor Ramashankar Dubeji, of whom I have heard so much. It's been an honor to finally meet you, sir, Honorable Vice Chancellor of the Central University of Gujarat, and a wonderful friend and a friend of my friend, Professor Manish, whom I have finally again met up here. Excellently curated conference. I really wouldn't like to call it a conference. It's more than that. It's been I think a center of churning for the last 2 days. And Professor Amit Dholakia, thank you so much for extending the invitation and for having me here. I'm extremely deeply honored and grateful to all of you. And of course, those in the audience, um, I see wonderful smiles also, because perhaps anticipating, that what I'm going to say has already been told. Uh, and so it's always very interesting to come to MS University. This is not my first time. Baroda for us, MS University for us is like a pilgrimage. I grew up in Pondicherry. I spent 20 years in the ashram that Sri Aurobindo founded. I did my PhD on Sri Aurobindo. I remember a former vice chancellor of a university who was foxed. He said, "What are you going to do in life doing a PhD on Sri Aurobindo?" So I said, "Well, it has been one of my goals, objectives since childhood, that I would one day do a PhD on Sri Aurobindo from a recognized university and be awarded a PhD on him." I have not thought what I would do with that PhD. So of course I could not satisfy him. So that, it is an expression of the challenges of our education system, that ये करके क्या होगा या इसमें मेरा क्या. I think so. All the thinkers that you have discussed, they never asked what is in it for them. They did what they did. They took up what they took up, and they pursued it right till the logical conclusion. In each of these thinkers, if you look at them, what dominated, what predominated was the essence, the sense, and the idea of India, of Bharat. And most of them operated under a colonial situation, and operating, functioning under a colonial situation, to be able to churn out all that they did, to be able to generate narratives the manner in which they did, that alone signified their greatness. That alone signified them, set them apart as epoch making thinkers of modern India. All of them fall in that category. So for us, MS University is obviously a place of pilgrimage, because one comes here, one feels Professor Aurobindo Ghosh. And for another reason also, because in Baroda, you get a sense of what the Bharatiya idea of kingship was. And Maharaja Sayajirao represented that. I think one of the most underrated personalities of modern India, somebody who has not been studied enough. And of course, it was in vogue for quite a few decades. At least I'm happy that, in a university today, we are standing and discussing Deen Dayal Upadhyay. We are standing and discussing Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. We are standing and discussing Baba Saheb Bhimrao Ambedkar. Because there were quite a few decades in India when some personalities were taboo. You could not touch them. It would be incorrect, politically incorrect, to discuss them. And so there was also an ideology which demonized the Indian rulers as debauch, as completely dominating rulers who completely extracted their subjects, and they painted everyone with the same brush. So in that rubric, Maharaja Sayajirao also fell. In that rubric, Maharaja Hari Singh also fell. At least now, there is a relook at Maharaja Hari Singh. Otherwise, it was very easy to demonize him as an undecided ruler who did not want to accede to India. It was a very convenient narrative that was pushed. So it was a very convenient narrative that was pushed on Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. Oh, leader of the Hindu Mahasabha, one of the biggest communal divisive personalities of modern India. But I have just presented my books to both the Honorable Vice Chancellors, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, and this was a book I wrote I edited in 2017 with late Professor A.K. Singh, former Vice Chancellor of Ambedkar University. Till the last year of his life, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee continued to deliver convocation addresses. His last convocation address that he delivered was to the University of Gujarat, was to the University of Delhi. And Pune, Patna, Banaras Hindu University, take Gurukul Kangri, all the major universities at that time had invited him to deliver their convocation addresses. He was intensely engaged with educational work and activity in India. That is an aspect of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee that, people did not want to discuss, because then it would have presented you a holistic view of the person. Similarly, Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay. So I'm extremely happy. Good. At least we are breathing some fresh air where academic apartheid is not practiced anymore. Because this country, for many decades, I'm sorry if I am offending some sentiments here, but this country practiced academic apartheid for many decades. So you won't be given a level playing field. There would be no engagement with ideas. It would just be dumping of certain personalities, certain thinkers who are not convenient to a certain rubric and framework. And that's why I think it's extremely important that we gather here on regular occasions. In fact, I would also suggest, and you please convey my deepest regards to Rajmata. Last time I was here, she was an extremely gracious host, and I had promised that I would come and spend time in the library there. I think there can be a series on Sayajirao and his various dimensions. Now, I don't know whether it has been discussed, because you, Professor Dubeji referred to Sayajirao's donation to Banaras Hindu University. From 1925 onwards, Sayajirao had instituted an annual grant of 6,000 rupees for Vishwabharati. And it would be an annual grant of 6,000 rupees. I mean, you don't even realize that this man was everywhere. Every initiative that reflected India, every initiative that symbolized the aspiration of India's awakening, this man was there. He was there behind it, supporting it in his own way. And for example, the Baroda Oriental series that he brought out, that he supported. K.V. Rangaswamy Iyengar's book on pilgrimages in India, and that was written before Radhakumud Mukherjee's Fundamental Unity of India, which was brought out in 1914. The Baroda Oriental series were a fundamental work that Sayajirao supported. And Sayajirao's own range was amazing. Administration, industry, public health, education, social reforms, history, theology, arts, he spoke. He spoke on all these subjects. He had a mastery on all these subjects. And in fact, in 1906, while addressing a public meeting in Kolkata, he said, I call your attention to the development of a national spirit. I favor adoption of a national speech and the inculcation of a national spirit. I think it was extremely bold of an Indian ruler, of an Indian prince at that point of time to use these words, national spirit, national speech. And narrow regionalism at times, obviously, part of our DNA, it keeps coming up. So, but you know, Gujaratis, on the occasion of the foundation laying ceremony of Vishwabharati, the largest donation that was made to Vishwabharati were from Gujaratis who donated a few thousand rupees. So I think through these thinkers, we need to go back to that era when there was a constant attempt at synthesis. And if there were differences, for example, the Mahatma and the poet, if you read the letters, there were differences. But these differences were dialogue, they were dialogic. They did not cut each other off. So one of the fundamental utilities of such exercises is to go back to that tradition, to go back to that approach. I also, standing here, obviously, Baba Saheb Ambedkar, one has to remember him. And in those days, the most, जो कहते हैं ना, foreign educated, सबसे ज़्यादा foreign educated, Baba Saheb Ambedkar. And that power of that conviction, that one-pointedness that he brought upon his public activity, upon his writings. In fact, when he was when he was able to construct his house, Baba Saheb was not bothered about the size of the living room or the bedroom or the dining space. He was only bothered with that floor on top where his library would be kept. And he was worried. He said, if he was suffering from diabetes. So the doctor told him to be careful. He said, I'm only worried because it'll keep corroding your organs. So he said, I'm only worried that if it corrodes my eyes, how am I going to read? And if I can't read, I can't live. So I remember came Munshi here. And came Munshi, obviously we have, I think next time also he can be included because Baroda made him, Sri Aurobindo made him. I remember the Gandhian Mohanlal Pandya, who was Sri Aurobindo's student in Baroda, and who went on later to become one of the leading satyagrahis of Kheda Satyagraha and of Bardoli. And they say if Mohanlal Pandya was not there supporting Sardar Saheb, Vallabhbhai Patel wouldn't have become Sardar if Mohanlal Pandya was not there. And he was here in Baroda, student of Sri Aurobindo, later on took to violent means of revolution and then joined the Satyagraha movement in Bardoli. you can stop me when I have to stop, because we have a bad habit, because what happens is one who speaks likes to listen to his voice, but it's obviously a taxation, huge pressure on those who have to listen. So you can just raise your hand and then I'll stop. Now, we also standing here, especially when in Gujarat, हाँ उठा सकते हैं हाथ, मैं रोक दूंगा कभी भी, कोई झिझक नहीं होना चाहिए. We have to remember Gijubai Badekha and Taraben Modak Gijubai started the uniquely Indian Montessori movement, and the Dakshinamurti Bal Mandir was the first systematic preschool in Gujarat and in India. So, I think you have a very fertile, Gujarat has always been a very extremely fertile ground, fertile soil. And the national education movement instituted by Sri Aurobindo and Lokmanya later on was taken forward by Mahatma Gandhi, K.M. Munshi, Gijubai, and all the legions of educationists and thinkers who sprouted all across this country. I want to make one more point, because you must have followed the debate that has been going on for the last 2 days, of the usual debate of 3-language formula, and there has been a continuous attempt to politicize something which is essentially not political at all. I grew up in Pondicherry learning 5 languages. Sri Aurobindo learned 7 languages. He was proficient in 7 languages, 14 languages total, proficient in 7 languages. And in fact, every time I'm down south, every time I'm in Odisha, I try and make it a point to speak in Odia and to speak in Tamil. In fact, if you are inherently open to learning languages, there's something very fascinating about learning languages and about language evolving and developing character and personality. In fact, Suniti Kumar Chatterjee, one of the greatest linguists that India has produced, chairman of the first Sanskrit Commission, a profound intellect, close associate of Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore. Very interesting. I came across this, in course of my writing and research. He was called Nanneri Murugan in Tamil, Suniti Kumara. The Tamilians honored him by conferring on him a Tamil name, because Suniti Chatterjee's book Dravidians spoke extensively of the uniqueness of Tamil language and culture. And at the same time, he laid stress on the value of the Sanskrit tradition for the whole of India, including the world of Tamil Nadu and Tamizakam. I think this is an age, and this was in 1964, the Annamala University published Suniti Kumar Chatterjee's book on Dravidians. And this was in 1964. But then later on, in last 30 years, all this has gone off, all this has been pushed off track. We should bring these center stage, because all of these personalities that you discuss were integrative personalities. They were not divisive personalities. They were integrative, and for them, they were extremely rooted to their region, to their languages, but they had the view and the idea and the vision of India as a whole. विश्व भारती में हजारी प्रसाद द्विवेदी जी को गुरुदेव ने बुलाकर वहां हिंदी डिपार्टमेंट का स्थापना किया, हिंदी विभाग का, and it has one of the richest collection of Hindi books. I mean, why would Gurudev start a Hindi department in Vishwa Bharati? He was one of the greatest exponents of Bengali. And under Shyama Prasad Mukherjee and his father, Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee, both vice chancellors of Calcutta University, Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee in the first 1907 onwards, and Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee 1934, the youngest vice chancellor at the age of 33, a record that remains unbroken. आजकल तो 33 साल में भी पीएचडी करते हैं लोग, कुछ यूनिवर्सिटीज में बैठ के पीएचडी करते रहते हैं. It has become a profession. Ashutosh Mukherjee and Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee initiated study of Indian languages. Pali, not only Pali, the first ever department of Pali to be established in any Indian university was in the University of Calcutta. There was Telugu, there were Assamese, Hindi, South Indian languages, as well as a large Maithili, large number of North Indian languages also were taught in Calcutta University. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee did his graduation in English and he did his masters in Bangla. And in both he came out as a topper. The University of Calcutta's insistence on developing and promoting Indian languages was unique at that point of time. And in fact, scientific terminologies were developed in Bangla so that students wanting to undertake science studies could do so in their own mother tongue. It was revolutionary for that period. And you may know this famous phase in history, that for the first time in the 80 years history of Calcutta University, the convocation address, 22nd February 1937, was delivered in Bangla by Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore at the invitation of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. So I think, and Gurudev, in his inimitable Bengali style, there's an authorized version which is still found. There's an authorized version, a translation of that speech. He says, in that address, Gurudev says, learning loses its vitamins. I mean, this translation is not even close to the actual Bangla translation, but nevertheless, I was nearly tempted to speak in Bangla when I heard that Jyotiben spoke in Gujarati. But then there'll be not many who will understand Bangla now here. But it will be again taxing already so much, because the challenge is between load of information and brain rot. That's the Gen Z, Gen Z. That's the Gen Z challenge, brain rot. So I don't want to get into that, brain rot. Gurudev say in his address, first time in the 80 years history of Calcutta University, the convocation address was delivered in Bangla. He says, learning loses its vitamins if trained through a foreign language. In no country in the world, except India, and this is in 1937, in no country in the world, except India, is to be seen in this divorce of the language of instruction from the language of the pupil. We know of parasitic creatures in the animal world that live and die in utter dependence on their hosts. They are able to eke out a living, but are forever crippled in the growth of their limbs and organs. Such has been the case with our modern school and college education. It has, from its inception, been parasitic on a foreign tongue, so that though nourishment has not been altogether lacking, it has been obtained at the cost of all-round development, so much so that it has even ceased to be sensible of its own abortiveness. What a wonderful expression. Accustomed to live by borrowing, it has come to measure attainment by largeness of debt. It has signed a bond of servitude to the thinkers of other lands. Those who receive such education cannot produce what they consume. They cannot produce what they consume. Brought up to absorb the thoughts of others, their academic success depends on their ability to repeat by rote, and their own faculty of thought, their courage of conviction, their creative inspiration have all been enfeebled. You can read this address, it's there. convocation addresses of Calcutta University, archive.org. मुझे भी थोड़ा रिसर्च पता है, मैं रेफरेंस भी दे सकता हूं आप लोगों को. Convocations of Calcutta University. It's there in the volume 1. You can go through this speech. Amazing. So I just wanted to make these few points. Now, as we move towards the conclusion, if there can be if there is a conclusion to this discussion. Now, when we speak about NEP, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has constantly referred to one thing about NEP, that is the education about 21st century India. Yes, now I also want to, I'm going to say what I want to say, make certain points. It's very interesting that from 1986, the last education policy was done in 1986. And that was when Dr. Kirit Joshi, it's very interesting, Dr. Kirit Joshi did the last education policy. And then he was instrumental in setting up the Children's University in Gujarat, the first state under Chief Minister Narendra Modi to have a university dedicated to children learning and pedagogy. And that was set up by Dr. Kirit Joshi. It was his push that did it. It was the idea of Sri Modi, and it was then taken forward by Professor Kirit Joshi. Now, if you look at between 1986 and 2020, there was no education policy. In fact, every 10 years, every decade, there should be a decadal reassessment of a national education policy. It did not happen for 3 decades. 1986, most of you were not born, and I was in class, some class 5, 6, I don't remember also. Cold War was raging. You had the world divided into 2 blocks. The computers were huge. You had no iPhones, nothing at all. You still had those dial phones. 1986, you draft an education policy, and in 2020, till 2020, you don't have a second educational policy. I think that was the biggest lacuna that the NEP fulfilled and completed. And education for 21st century India. Now, if you look at all these thinkers, and if you look at the 5 goals of the Pancha Pran that Prime Minister Modi speaks about, goal of a developed India, remove traces of colonial mindset, take pride in our roots and our culture, virasat, the sense of unity, and the sense of duty, kartavya. A very peculiar sense of the Indian sense of democracy was the sense of kartavya. Sri Aurobindo speaks about this spirit and sense of democracy that was there in India of the past. Please read his Indian polity in the Foundations of Indian Culture, essays on the Indian Renaissance. You would look at all these thinkers, and if you juxtapose these 5 Pancha Pran against the fundamental thinking of these thought leaders, you would see that through their work, through their writings, they actually strove to achieve these. And I'll just recommend you 3 texts. I'm not going to read, I just had these paragraphs out because you read Sri Aurobindo's definition of education, and that's famous quote of his, a system of national education. In those essays, you'll find them. That alone will be a true and living education, which helps to bring out to full advantage, makes ready for the full purpose and scope of human life and all that is in the individual man. He goes on to say that there has to be this sense that the individual belongs to the great total life of his nation as well as of humanity. Please read that text, System of National Education. Then please read K.C. Bhattacharya's Swaraj in Idea, and especially that first line, the first paragraph, which says, cultural subjection, the slavery begins when one ceases to feel the evil, and it deepens when the evil is accepted as good. Cultural subjection is ordinarily of an unconscious character, and it implies slavery from the very start. And then he goes on to define what is cultural subjection. And then you can read the convocation addresses of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, where he talks about awakening the true national spirit and consciousness of the people. If you go through these fundamental texts, because it is extremely important for us when we are engaging with these thinkers to go through some of their fundamental texts, you'll see that the national education policy seeks to amalgamate the broad directions that these thinkers had given during their lifetime. Our national movement, freedom movement, was very unique because perhaps it was the only freedom struggle which had parallel to the political struggle, the struggle for a new education, for a free India. And that is what made India's freedom movement very unique. Please go through other freedom movements across the world. You will find so many thinkers, and all of them active in the political field. Take Bipin Chandra Pal, Lokmanya himself, Lala Lajpat Rai, K.M. Munshi, Pandit Madan Mohan Malaviya, host of other thinkers, and Sister Nivedita, Annie Besant. I've discussed all of them. Ananda Kumaraswamy, all of them converging along with the political struggle, bringing together ideas of a new education for a free India. And I think that is where the national education policy is reflective of the aspirations of these thinkers. The National College in Bengal was obviously an extremely important movement. The national education movement in Bengal was important. But please let us remember that there was the national education movement in Maharashtra, in Punjab, down south. A section of the historians or interpreters would like us to believe that, oh, it was just a movement which petered out. It was not that. It was a movement which created waves. The core movement may have petered out, with Sri Aurobindo withdrawing, Satish Chandra Mukherjee going off to Banaras, Lala Lajpat Rai, Bipin Chandra Pal being sent off, exiled abroad. But the movement generated waves, and it created scholars, it created institutions. The Gujarat Vidyapeeth is a result of that. Vishwabharati is a result of that. And you had thinkers like Radha Kumud Mukherjee later on. You had thinkers like Binay Kumar Sarkar, who were part and portion of the national education movement, who went on to become thinkers and educationists in their own right. So I just wanted to, flag these points. And at the end, I just wanted to say that it's part of my submission, my thesis. You had the Radha Krishnan Commission, the University Education Commission, 1948-49. In fact, I think Manishji, you mentioned, or sir, I think you mentioned the term integral education. The term integral education, the D.S. Kothari Commission, 1965. Professor Kothari actually interviewed the mother. And in that interview, the term integral education came up. Sri Aurobindo himself did not use the word integral education. He had not coined it. It was the mother, while speaking to the UGC Commission 1965, who said it can be termed as integral education. But there are many ifs in history. One of the ifs of history is this, and I have it here. I have argued that post-independence, there was no fundamental basic discussion on education. Gandhiji's basic education also was dumped. Nobody seriously experimented with Gandhiji's Nai Talim and basic education. Why was basic education not weaved into our primary curriculum? The national education policy talks about work with your manual work. It gives that dignity to manual work. It was something that had completely vanished from our education discourse. Please go to the national education movement, to the national college, and you'll see all our thinkers encouraged manual work and manual training. It has achieved centrality in the national education policy. Languages, the richness of languages, and this sense that you can also be recognized as educated if you only know your mother tongue and speak in it. That is one of the cardinal centrality, I would say, of the national education policy. And every thinker that you have spoken about, I feel ashamed at times that, I mean, I can write. Obviously I do write Bengali. I speak in Bengali fluently. I read enormously, but I can't write Bengali the way that others wrote. They were fluent in their mother tongue and were masters of English. Sri Aurobindo in Baroda learned the Indian languages, and all of them, Baba Saheb included, Tagore's own writings in English. Fascinating. All of them knew both the languages equally. They had a mastery, but they gave importance to their own mother tongue. So I think this, when we talk about decolonization, it's a very important dimension, that you have your own language and you are instructed in your language. You are a master of your language and you can learn anything in your language. And that is what the national education policy promotes. In France, in Germany, in Japan, they are not ashamed. They speak to you in their own languages. The Radhakrishnan Commission, I just want to conclude with this, of 1948-49. Yeah, I mean, there was a professor who at least said 5 times he would like to conclude before concluding. So I'll conclude. If you look at those that they interviewed, the Radhakrishnan Commission interviewed people like R.C. Majumdar, K.T. Shah, P.V. Kane, D.V. Kundappa, Jadunath Sarkar. I hope these names are familiar, at least some of them are familiar. They interviewed Binay Kumar Sarkar and Radha Kamal Mukherjee, who were products of the national education movement. And the Radhakrishnan Commission spoke about the need of a radical change of spirit if the education system has to change. The Radhakrishnan Commission spoke about universities as organs of civilization. The Radhakrishnan Commission spoke about Samanvay, knowledge of life as a whole, harmony of patterns, exactly what Sri Aurobindo is saying. Sri Aurobindo is writing in his early writings on education in the 1920s. The Radhakrishnan Commission speaks about all true development is self-development. And here, my question was, the Radhakrishnan Commission went up to Madras, but did not visit Pondicherry. Sri Aurobindo was there. He had relaxed his seclusion. He was meeting people. He was given the C.R. Reddy medal by the Andhra University. He was given that. He met K.M. Munshi. So I wonder, what if the Radhakrishnan Commission and its experts had actually gone and met Sri Aurobindo, or had even sent him a questionnaire saying, what are your views about of how the education of a free India ought to be organized? What if? That if never happened. I don't know why they did not go up to Pondicherry. They did not interview Sri Aurobindo. And so ifs of history. Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee was later invited by the mother to establish the Sri Aurobindo University, the Memorial Convention, of which I am a product. And therefore, coming to Baroda at MS University, speaking on Shyama Prasad Mukherjee and Sri Aurobindo, heading an institution named after Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, having studied in an institution named after Sri Aurobindo, of which he was the founder convener, is for me obviously an extremely emotional moment. And just as Sri Aurobindo had 3 principles of education, the first principle is that what? First principle is that, no, the experts will say, but please behind. The first principle of teaching is that nothing can be taught. So they are much all your teachers also should feel free. The true teaching is that nothing can be taught. The second principle is that the mind has to be consulted in its growth. You can't impose. You can't impose on a student. You can't pre-hammer it or her into a pre-decided mold. You want this, you want your child to be something, so please dump him or her in a certain system. And the third principle is from the near to the far. We'll obviously know about what China is doing or what China is, but then let us know first how things are happening in the taluka behind or where we live, from the near to the far. Usually it was the other way. And that Gandhiji had a major problem with the colonial education. Dharampal, in his writing The Beautiful Tree, where he mentions Gandhiji and Gandhiji's conversation with William Hartog and Gandhiji appointing K.T. Shah, that was the major problem, that you are giving them something which is not, in which they are not rooted. Similarly, in our work, in our writings, we come across Ashtata Siddhanta, 8 conditions of education that Shama Prasad Mukherjee visualized just after India got independence. And I think those 8 Siddhantas are extremely important and relevant to this day. And most importantly for me, the national education policy aspires to achieve, to fulfill a lot of those Siddhantas. First and foremost, a system of education consistent with the genius of the people of India and suited to modern life and conditions. Secondly, there must be less of degrading poverty and less of disease, and there has to be a nationwide attempt to take the country forward. I'm just paraphrasing, I'm not getting into. Fourthly, there must be an elaborate system of elementary and secondary education which will form an enduring foundation on which the great structure of university education will be built. Fifthly, education at every stage should be as cheap as possible while its quality will be maintained at a high level. Sixthly, let us emphasize that universities must inspire private benefactors on a much wider scale. Seventhly, there must be a close and honorable connection between education, trade, industry, and commerce. Lastly, the universities must be given the amplest freedom to work out their salvation. In fact, the University Grants Commission was first thought of by Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee. But he had said there very clearly that it should not be a controlling authority. It should be a dispenser of resources, but should also provide ample scope and freedom for universities to innovate. So these are the points that I wanted to make. Thank you for being extremely patient and for listening so patiently. Now I would recommend that you read the convocation. Please do read the convocation addresses of Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee. Please read the Vishwa Bharati Debate Bill of 1951. When the Vishwa Bharati was being taken over as a government institution, there was a debate that ensued in Parliament, in the interim Parliament. Lok Sabha was not yet constituted. So in May 1950, the Vishwa Bharati debate took place in Parliament. Please go through that debate. Some of the greatest minds participated in that debate. And I think it's very fundamental to understanding our tradition of education and the institution of education that our freedom movement established. Please read Sri Aurobindo's writings on education, which are not much. He did not write much on education, but whatever he wrote continues to give us sufficient to keep churning out books and keeping our shops open. Please do read K.C. Bhattacharya. Make it a habit. Make it a habit to read Lala Lajpat Rai's writings on young India, on education. Bipin Chandra Pal, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's, Deendayal Upadhyay. One seminar is just a push so that we get into the habit of going to the fundamentals, the fundamental texts, and reading, coming out with our own conclusions, with our own writings. And please do read and write. That is also extremely important. Thank you for such a wonderful seminar. I'm extremely grateful for giving me this opportunity. Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I believe the dynamism that I was talking about was not a lie, and you all would definitely agree with me that whatever he presented was a corpus, not loaded, but it was actually a good corpus, not an overload. I don't think so, it was overloading, but yes, a corpus that something we take back home with us out of all the deliberations which took place throughout these 2 days. And sir, yes, your discussion and your address was actually a cherry on top of the cake, or cherry on top of the kheer, or whatever you would like to, whichever dessert you would like. And now we're left with the chairperson's remarks. I request Professor Dhanesh Patel, in charge Vice Chancellor of the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda, to deliver his address.